I found the letter in my mailbox on a Tuesday afternoon, sandwiched between a credit card offer and a grocery store flyer. The envelope looked official, heavy cream-colored paper with a law firm's return address embossed in the corner. I almost tossed it aside, figuring it was some mass mailing about a class action lawsuit I had no interest in joining. But something made me tear it open right there on my driveway, standing in the Arizona heat with my work bag still slung over my shoulder. "Dear Mr. Harold Quincy," it began, and my stomach dropped before I even read the next line. "We regret to inform you that the Homeowners Association governing Saguaro Heights subdivision has been declared legally void due to irregularities discovered in the original plat documentation." I read it 3 times, standing there like an idiot while my neighbor Steve drove past and waved. Void. The entire HOA gone, just like that. My name is Harold Quincy, and I had lived in Saguaro Heights just outside Phoenix for 6 years. 6 years of monthly HOA fees, 6 years of dealing with Patricia Morrison and her tyrannical board, 6 years of maintaining my lawn to their exact specifications and repainting my house trim in one of their approved colors. And now, someone was telling me none of it had been legal? I walked inside, still reading the letter. It got worse. According to the law firm of Hendricks, Martinez and Associates, the developer who had created Saguaro Heights back in 2016, a man named Richard Calloway, had forged the signature of a property owner when filing the original HOA plat documents. That single forged signature had invalidated the entire legal structure of our community association. 200 homeowners, all receiving this same letter, all learning that the organization that had governed our lives for nearly a decade had no legal standing whatsoever. My phone rang before I even finished the letter. It was my buddy Tom from 3 streets over. "Did you get it?" he asked without preamble. "Just read it. This is insane. Debbie is freaking out. She wants to know if we have to pay back all those fines Patricia hit us with for our basketball hoop." I sat down heavily on my couch. I have no idea what this means for any of us. "Emergency meeting tonight," Tom said. 7 p.m. at the community center. Figured you would want to know before the official notice goes out. Of course, there would be a meeting. Patricia Morrison would never let something like this happen without gathering everyone together to assert whatever control she thought she still had. I thanked Tom and hung up, then immediately called my wife. "Vanessa, you need to hear this," I said when she picked up. She was at her office downtown, probably deep in some marketing campaign. "The HOA is void, legally void, everything." There was a long pause. "What are you talking about?" I explained what I knew, which was not much. Vanessa, ever practical, immediately started asking questions I could not answer. What happened to all the money in the HOA account? What about the common areas? Who maintained the pool and the landscaping? Were our property values about to tank? "I do not know," I kept saying. "There's a meeting tonight." "I will leave early," she said. "This is bad, Harold. This is really bad." She was not wrong. I spent the next few hours doing what everyone else in the neighborhood was probably doing, searching the internet for information about voided HOAs, forged signatures on plat documents, and what happened when an entire subdivision's legal structure collapsed. The answers I found were not encouraging. By 6:30, cars were already lining up outside the community center. I had never seen this many people at an HOA meeting, not even when Patricia had tried to ban political signs during the last election cycle. The parking lot was full, so I had to park 2 blocks away on a side street. As I walked back, I could see clusters of neighbors standing around, all talking urgently, all holding their cream-colored letters. Inside, the community center was packed. Someone had set up extra folding chairs, but there still were not enough. People lined the walls, sat on the floor, crowded in the doorway. The noise level was incredible, hundreds of conversations happening at once, voices raised in confusion, anger, and fear. Patricia Morrison stood at the front of the room behind the board table, and she looked like she had aged 10 years since I had last seen her at the monthly meeting 2 weeks ago. Her usually perfect blonde bob was slightly disheveled, and her makeup could not quite hide the stress lines around her eyes. Beside her sat the other board members. Gary Feldman, the treasurer, a nervous man in his 50s who was currently shuffling papers like his life depended on it. Sandra Chen, the secretary who kept typing furiously on her laptop, and Brett Kowalski, the vice president, who looked like he wanted to be literally anywhere else. At exactly 7 p.m., Patricia banged the gavel, a gesture that now seemed almost comically pointless. What authority did she have to call this meeting to order? But the room quieted anyway, years of conditioning hard to break. "I know you have all received the letter from Hendricks, Martinez and Associates," Patricia began, her voice tight. "The board was served with legal papers yesterday afternoon. We have been informed that the original HOA plat filed in 2016 contains a forged signature, specifically that of a property owner named Michael Chen, who owned Lot 47 at the time of filing." "Michael Chen?" someone called out. "That is my uncle. He sold that property years ago." Sandra Chen stood up. "My father-in-law never signed those documents. He did not even know about the HOA until after he had already sold the lot. When the developer contacted him about signing, my father-in-law refused because he was concerned about restricting future owners' rights. Apparently, Mr. Calloway decided to forge his signature and file anyway." The room erupted. Everyone was shouting questions at once. Patricia banged the gavel again, but nobody paid attention. "How did this even come out?" someone yelled. Sandra answered, "My father-in-law passed away last year. When we were settling his estate, we found correspondence between him and the developer about the HOA. He had specifically refused to sign and had kept copies of everything. When I realized what had happened, I consulted an attorney." "So you destroyed the HOA?" a woman near the front shrieked. "You destroyed all our property values?" "My father-in-law's signature was forged," Sandra shot back, her voice shaking. "That is fraud. That is illegal. Did you want me to just ignore that?" I raised my hand, waiting to be recognized, but Patricia was not looking at anyone anymore. She was staring down at her notes like they contained the secrets of the universe. "What happens now?" I called out without waiting. "What happens to all the money we have paid? What happens to our community?" Gary Feldman cleared his throat. "The HOA currently has approximately $240,000 in its accounts. We have been advised by our attorney that those funds are in a complex legal situation. Since the HOA had no legal standing, the collection of those fees may have been invalid." "May have been," someone shouted. "Either it was legal or it was not." "It is complicated," Gary said weakly. "Some homeowners may have claims to refunds. Others paid voluntarily even without legal obligation. It will likely require litigation to sort out." This was getting worse by the minute. I looked around the room and saw the same panic on every face. We had built our lives around this community, this structure, these rules. And now someone was telling us it had all been based on a lie. Brett Kowalski stood up, his face red. "I am resigning from the board, effective immediately. I did not sign up for this mess." He walked out, and nobody tried to stop him. Patricia finally looked up. "We have been advised to continue operating the HOA on a voluntary basis while the legal situation is resolved. We can ask for voluntary contributions to maintain common areas," and the laughter that swept the room was harsh and bitter. Voluntary contributions? After years of Patricia fining people for leaving their trash cans out 10 minutes too long, after she had threatened liens on houses for unauthorized patio furniture, after she had made everyone's life miserable with her constant rule enforcement, the idea that anyone would voluntarily give her money now was absurd. "What about all the fines?" Tom called out from the back. "What about the liens?" "Likely unenforceable," Gary admitted. "Any liens filed by the HOA may be invalid. Any fines collected may need to be returned." The meeting devolved into chaos after that. Patricia tried to maintain order, but it was pointless. People were angry, scared, and looking for someone to blame. Sandra Chen and her father-in-law were convenient targets, but so was Patricia for being such a tyrant all these years. And so was the developer Richard Calloway, though he was apparently long gone from Arizona. I left after an hour, my head pounding. Vanessa met me in the parking lot. She had been sitting in on the meeting remotely from her car, listening through a neighbor's phone. "This is a disaster," she said as we walked home. "Complete disaster." Over the next few days, the neighborhood descended into anarchy. Without the HOA's enforcement power, even the threat of it, people started doing whatever they wanted. The guy on Saguaro Street who had always wanted to paint his house bright purple started getting quotes. Someone set up a above-ground pool in their front yard. Political signs, banned for years, sprouted like weeds. But it was not just about freedom from Patricia's rules. Real problems emerged quickly. The landscaping company that maintained our common areas stopped showing up after they were not paid. The pool sat unattended, turning green. Trash piled up around the community mailboxes because the maintenance service had not been paid either. I spent my evenings on the phone with lawyers trying to understand my options. Most of them told me the same thing. This was going to take years to sort out. The money in the HOA accounts would be tied up in litigation. Any improvements we had paid for collectively might need to be evaluated individually. Property values were definitely going to take a hit. A week after the letters went out, I got a call from a reporter at the Arizona Republic. Somehow, the story had leaked, and now the media wanted details about the neighborhood where a forged signature had destroyed the HOA. I have nothing to say, I told her. Mr. Quincy, this is a significant story. 200 families affected by developer fraud, an HOA that operated for years without legal standing. The public has a right to know. Then talk to the developer. Talk to Richard Callaway. Mr. Callaway has declined to comment. His attorney says he is not available for interviews. Of course he was not. I hung up on the reporter, but the story ran anyway. The next morning, there it was on the front page of the local section, Forged Signature Voids Entire Phoenix Area HOA. The article quoted Sandra Chen, quoted Patricia Morrison, and included a stock photo of a generic suburban street that looked nothing like Saguaro Heights. My phone started ringing before 8 a.m. My boss wanted to know if this would affect my work. My mother-in-law wanted to know if we were going to lose our house. My brother thought the whole thing was hilarious and could not stop laughing about Patricia Morrison's tyrannical reign coming to such an abrupt end. But it was not funny. Not when I looked at my mortgage statement and realized I had been paying into a house in a community that might now fall apart. Not when I drove past the pool and saw it was turning into a swamp. Not when I noticed that people had stopped mowing their lawns because Patricia could not find them anymore. 2 weeks after the letters, I got another piece of mail, this time from a different law firm. Benson & Strauss, LLC, was organizing a class action lawsuit against Richard Callaway and his development company, Callaway Properties, Inc. They were seeking damages for fraud, seeking the return of all HOA fees paid under false pretenses, seeking compensation for the loss of property values. I showed the letter to Vanessa that night over dinner. Should we join? She asked. I do not know. More legal fees, more time, and who knows if Callaway even has any money left. The development was years ago. But he committed fraud, Harold. He forged someone's signature and filed legal documents. That is a crime. She was right, and I was tired of feeling helpless. I signed the form and sent it back. The class action was not the only lawsuit brewing. Gary Feldman, the former treasurer, was being sued personally by homeowners who claimed he should have caught the irregularity in the original documents. Patricia Morrison was being sued for years of overzealous enforcement of rules that had no legal backing. Sandra Chen was being sued by people who blamed her for exposing the fraud instead of keeping quiet. Everyone was suing everyone. It was exactly what the lawyers had predicted. Meanwhile, the neighborhood continued to deteriorate. Without anyone maintaining the common areas, weeds grew tall in the flower beds. The community center's air conditioning broke, and nobody knew who was responsible for fixing it. A pipe burst in the pool house, and the flooding damaged the storage rooms. I tried to organize a voluntary cleanup day, figuring maybe we could maintain some sense of community. I sent out an email through the old HOA mailing list, asking for volunteers to help clean up the pool area and trim back the overgrown landscaping. 10 people showed up. Out of 200 homeowners, 10 people came to help. We spent a Saturday morning pulling weeds and scooping debris out of the pool, but it was like trying to bail out the ocean with a teaspoon. The problems were too big, and we did not have the resources or authority to fix them. Tom came by while I was loading trash bags into my truck. This is pointless, you know, he said. Without money and without legal authority to collect money, we cannot maintain any of this. So we just let it fall apart? I'm saying we need a real solution, a new HOA properly filed with everyone's actual signatures. I had thought about that too, But getting 200 homeowners to agree on anything seemed impossible, especially now when everyone was angry and suspicious and blaming each other. A month after the letters, I got a summons. I was being called to give a deposition in one of the lawsuits. Apparently, as a long-term resident and someone who had attended most HOA meetings, my testimony was relevant to establishing what everyone knew and when they knew it. I sat in a conference room downtown with 3 attorneys and a court reporter while they asked me questions for 4 hours. What did I know about the HOA's formation? When did I first learn about the forged signature? Had Patricia Morrison ever mentioned concerns about the legality of the HOA's authority? Did I think Gary Feldman had properly managed the finances? I answered as honestly as I could, but the whole experience left me feeling drained and angry. This was my life now. Endless legal proceedings, endless questions about something I had thought was settled years ago when I bought my house. Vanessa and I started talking about selling. Maybe we could get out before the property values completely tanked. Maybe we could start fresh somewhere else, somewhere with a functional HOA or no HOA at all. But when I talked to a realtor, she was blunt. You need to disclose the HOA situation to any potential buyers. And honestly, Mr. Quincy, most people are going to run the other way. Who wants to buy into this mess? We were trapped, stuck in a house we could not easily sell, in a neighborhood falling apart with no clear path forward. Then, 2 months after the initial letters, something unexpected happened. The FBI showed up. I was at work when Vanessa called, her voice high and panicked. There are federal agents at the house. They are talking to everyone on the street. They want to talk to you. I left work immediately, driving home way too fast. When I pulled up to our house, there were indeed 2 people in dark suits talking to my neighbors across the street. I parked and walked over, my heart pounding. Harold Quincy? One of them asked, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes. Yes? Special Agent Reeves, FBI. This is Agent Nakamura. We would like to ask you some questions about Richard Calloway and Calloway Properties. We sat at my dining room table, Vanessa hovering nervously in the kitchen. The agents explained that the Saguaro Heights situation had triggered a broader investigation. Apparently, Richard Calloway had developed several subdivisions across Arizona, Nevada, and California over the past 15 years. The FBI was now looking into whether the forged signature in Saguaro Heights was an isolated incident or part of a pattern. We have found irregularities in at least 3 other developments, Agent Reeves said. Forged signatures, fabricated documents, false filings with county recorders. Mr. Calloway appears to have been systematically defrauding homeowners and local governments for over a decade. Where is he now? I asked. That is what we are trying to determine. He has not been at his last known address in Las Vegas for several months. We believe he may have left the country. They asked me about my experience with the HOA, about any interactions I had had with Calloway or his company. I told them I had never met the man. The house was already built and the HOA was already established when I bought in 2018. Everything had been handled through the title company and the HOA board. After the agents left, I sat in stunned silence. This was bigger than I had realized. This was not just about our neighborhood. This was federal fraud, potentially international flight, serious criminal activity. The news broke the next day. FBI investigates developer in multi-state HOA fraud scheme. Richard Calloway's photo was on every local news channel, a smiling man in his 60s with silver hair and an expensive suit. He looked like someone's friendly grandfather, not a criminal who had defrauded hundreds of families. The investigation brought some clarity to our situation, but also more complications. The FBI froze what assets they could find belonging to Calloway Properties, which meant any chance of recovering damages through civil litigation became even more remote. The government's case took priority, but it also brought attention. Suddenly, state legislators were talking about HOA reform, about stricter oversight of development companies, about better protections for homeowners. Our neighborhood became a cautionary tale, the poster child for what could go wrong when developers operated without adequate supervision. Patricia Morrison gave an interview on the local news, standing in front of the now-defunct community center, talking about how she had always operated in good faith, how she had had no idea the HOA's foundation was fraudulent. I almost threw something at the television. Good faith? The woman had terrorized the neighborhood for years, and now she was playing the victim. But watching her, I realized something. Patricia had been operating without legal authority, but so had all of us. Every homeowner who had paid their dues, who had followed the rules, who had voted in elections and approved budgets. We had all participated in a system that had no legal standing. We were all, in some way, complicit in the fiction. 3 months after the letters, the class action lawsuit against Callaway Properties was put on hold, pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. The lawsuits against Patricia, Gary, and Sandra were still proceeding, but slowly grinding through the court system with no resolution in sight. The neighborhood had settled into a new, ugly normal. Some people maintained their properties beautifully, taking pride in their homes regardless of HOA rules. Others let everything go, filling their yards with junk, letting their houses fall into disrepair. The pool was officially closed, drained, and fenced off. The community center was locked up, no longer available for events. Property values had dropped about 15% according to the latest estimates. Some people had managed to sell and get out, taking the loss. Others, like us, stayed because we had no choice or because we still believed the situation might somehow improve. I stopped going to the neighborhood meetings. A group of residents had formed a voluntary organization to try to maintain some standards, but without any enforcement power, it was toothless. People argued endlessly about what to do, how to fix things, who was responsible, but nothing ever got decided. Then, 6 months after the original letters, Richard Callaway was arrested. He was found in Costa Rica, living in a beachfront villa under an assumed name. The FBI, working with international authorities, had tracked him through financial records and brought him back to the United States to face charges: wire fraud, mail fraud, forgery, money laundering. The list was extensive. I watched his arraignment on the news, seeing him in an orange jumpsuit instead of an expensive suit. He pleaded not guilty, of course. His attorney talked about a vigorous defense, about misunderstandings and civil matters being criminalized. But the evidence seemed overwhelming. The criminal trial became the focal point for everyone in Saguaro Heights. If Callaway was convicted, maybe we could get some justice. Maybe we could recover some of our losses through restitution. Maybe we could at least have the satisfaction of seeing him punished for what he had done. I was called as a witness for the prosecution. The assistant U.S. attorney, a sharp woman named Jennifer Park, explained that they needed testimony from affected homeowners to establish the scope of the fraud and the impact on real people. The trial took place in federal court in Phoenix. I had never been in a courtroom before, not as a witness. It was intimidating, all wood paneling and high ceilings and serious-faced people. Callaway sat at the defense table, looking older and smaller than he had in his photos, flanked by 2 expensive attorneys. When it was my turn to testify, I was sworn in and took the stand. Jennifer Park asked me to describe my experience, to explain what the letter had meant, how it had affected my life and my family. I told the truth. I talked about the uncertainty, the financial stress, the way our neighborhood had fallen apart. I talked about the lawsuits and the fear and the sense of betrayal. I made eye contact with Callaway once, and he looked away. His defense attorney cross-examined me, trying to suggest that I had not really been harmed, that the HOA had provided services, that the situation was a technical irregularity blown out of proportion. I held my ground. A technical irregularity did not involve forging someone's signature. That was fraud, plain and simple. Other homeowners testified too. Tom talked about the fines his family had paid for violations of rules that had no legal basis. Sandra Chen talked about discovering her father-in-law's forged signature and the guilt she felt for having served on a board with no authority. Even Patricia Morrison testified, though she was a hostile witness, defensive and combative. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The evidence was damning. The prosecution presented documents showing that Callaway had forged signatures in 4 different developments, had lied to county officials, had knowingly filed false legal documents. They showed bank records indicating he had diverted money intended for HOA reserves into his personal accounts. They showed emails where he discussed the forgeries with employees, telling them to just sign the documents and file them before anyone noticed. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they came back, Callaway was convicted on 18 of 20 counts. The courtroom erupted in applause, and the judge had to bang his gavel for order. Sentencing was scheduled for 2 months later. In the meantime, the civil lawsuits started settling. With Calloway convicted, the liability was clear. His insurance companies began negotiating payouts. The assets the FBI had frozen were being prepared for restitution. Patricia Morrison dropped her defenses and settled with the homeowners suing her, admitting that she had been overzealous in her enforcement and agreeing to return all fines collected in the final 2 years of the HOA's operation. Gary Feldman settled too, his errors and omissions insurance covering claims that he had failed in his fiduciary duty. The lawsuit against Sandra Chen was dismissed. She had done nothing wrong by exposing the fraud. In fact, she had done exactly what she should have done. When Calloway's sentencing hearing arrived, I was back in the courtroom. The judge listened to victim impact statements for hours. Homeowners from Saguaro Heights and the other affected developments talked about their losses, their stress, the way their lives had been upended by Calloway's greed. When it was time for sentencing, the judge did not mince words. Mr. Calloway, you engaged in a systematic scheme to defraud hundreds of families. You forged legal documents, you lied to government officials, and you enriched yourself at the expense of hard-working people who trusted you. Your actions have caused immeasurable harm. He sentenced Calloway to 12 years in federal prison and ordered restitution of over $4 million to be distributed among the victims across all his fraudulent developments. It was not everything we had lost. It would not fix our neighborhood or undo years of uncertainty. But it was something. It was justice. After the sentencing, a group of us from Saguaro Heights went to lunch together. Tom, Sandra, Vanessa, and me, a few others who had become friends through this ordeal. We toasted with our drinks, celebrating the conviction, but the mood was bittersweet. What now? Tom asked. What do we do about the neighborhood? That was the real question. Calloway was going to prison, but our HOA was still void. Our common areas were still deteriorating. Our property values were still depressed. Sandra spoke up. I've been working with an attorney on a solution. We can create a new HOA, properly filed this time, with actual signatures from every homeowner who wants to participate. It would be voluntary initially, but if we get enough people on board, we can reestablish the covenants and restrictions. Would Patricia be in charge? Someone asked, only half joking. Sandra laughed. Absolutely not. New board, new rules, new approach. We learned what not to do. Over the next few months, Sandra's plan took shape. She organized informational meetings, hired a reputable HOA attorney to draft new documents, and went door to door collecting signatures. It was slow work. A lot of people were burned out, tired of anything related to HOAs. But gradually, support built. Vanessa and I debated whether to sign on. Part of me wanted nothing to do with an HOA ever again, but part of me recognized that without some structure, our neighborhood would continue to decline and our property values would keep dropping. We need something, Vanessa said. Maybe not Patricia's version, but something. We signed. So did Tom and Debbie. So did about 120 other homeowners. It was not everyone, but it was enough to create a viable organization. The new HOA was different from the start. The rules were simpler, focused on basic maintenance standards rather than Patricia's extensive regulations about every detail of home appearance. The board was elected with term limits to prevent anyone from becoming an entrenched tyrant. Fees were lower and transparently budgeted. Most importantly, every single signature was verified. Every single document was reviewed by multiple attorneys. Nobody wanted to go through this nightmare again. The restitution money from Calloway started arriving about a year after his sentencing. It was not as much as we had hoped once it was divided among all the victims, but it helped. I got about $8,000, which partially offset my legal fees and some of the property value loss. The new HOA used its portion to restore the common areas, repair the pool, and repaint the community center. Slowly, very slowly, Saguaro Heights started to come back. New families moved in, attracted by the lower prices and the promise of a reformed community. The pool reopened with a big neighborhood party. Landscaping improved. The sense of chaos that had reigned for months began to fade. Patricia Morrison moved away about 18 months after the letters went out. I ran into her at the grocery store right before she left. She looked tired, older, beaten down by everything that had happened. I was only trying to maintain standards, she said, unprompted. I was only trying to protect our property values. I could have said a lot of things. I could have pointed out that her tyrannical enforcement had made everyone miserable. I could have mentioned that the HOA she had ruled over had been invalid from the start, but looking at her, I just felt tired. I know, I said. Good luck with the move. She nodded and walked away, and I never saw her again. The legal aftermath continued for years. Some of the civil suits dragged on, appeals and counter-appeals and motions. But the main crisis was over. We had survived the collapse of our HOA, survived the discovery that our community's foundation was built on fraud, survived the chaos and uncertainty and fear. Standing in my backyard 3 years after that first letter, grilling burgers for a neighborhood cookout organized by the new HOA, I reflected on how much had changed. The community was smaller now, only the homeowners who had signed onto the new association. But it was healthier, more democratic, less oppressive. Tom came over with a beer, watching kids splash in the rebuilt pool. "You know what the crazy thing is?" he said. "I never thought I would want to be part of an HOA again after everything that happened, but this actually works." He was right. It did work. Not perfectly, never perfectly. But it was functional and fair and transparent. All the things Patricia's regime had never been, even when it had legal standing. Vanessa joined us, sliding her arm around my waist. "Food's almost ready," I told her. "Good. I am starving." We had lost a lot. Time, money, peace of mind, faith in institutions. The forged signature that voided our HOA had upended hundreds of lives, revealed criminal fraud spanning multiple states, and forced us all to confront what happens when the structures we rely on collapse. But we had also learned something. We learned that community is not just about rules and enforcement. It is about people choosing to work together, to maintain standards not because they fear fines, but because they value their neighborhood. We learned that transparency and accountability matter more than strict regulations. We learned that even when everything falls apart, you can rebuild if enough people are willing to try. Richard Calloway was in federal prison. Patricia Morrison was gone. The original HOA was a footnote in county records, a cautionary tale about the importance of verifying signatures and maintaining proper documentation. And Saguaro Heights, after years of chaos and uncertainty, was finally becoming the community it had always pretended to be. I flipped the burgers, listening to the sounds of my neighbors talking and laughing, kids playing in the pool, music drifting from someone's speakers. The sun was setting over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. My grass needed mowing, but nobody was going to find me for it. My house trim was due for repainting, but I could choose any color I wanted as long as it was not something completely outrageous. Freedom and structure balanced in a way that actually made sense. The letters had arrived 3 years ago, 200 identical envelopes delivering devastating news. A forged signature had voided our entire HOA plat. Everything we thought was settled was suddenly in question. The stability we had counted on was revealed as an illusion, but that illusion had been replaced with something more solid, something built on actual consent and transparency rather than fraud and tyranny. It had taken years of legal battles, a federal criminal trial, endless meetings and arguments and compromises. It had cost us money and stress and countless hours of worry. In the end, though, we had our neighborhood back, not the way it was, but better. Stronger because we had built it ourselves, together, with full knowledge of what we were creating. I called everyone to eat, and they gathered around the picnic tables we had set up, filling plates and settling in for a long summer evening. These were my neighbors, my friends, my community. Not because some developer had drawn lines on a plat and forged signatures, but because we had chosen it. That choice, that agency, that ownership of our community's future, it made all the difference. The forged signature had destroyed the old HOA, but in its destruction, it had created space for something genuine, something real, something that would last not because it was legally imposed, but because it was collectively supported. As the evening stretched on and the conversation flowed, I felt something I had not felt in years when thinking about Saguaro Heights. I felt optimistic, Despite everything we had been through, despite all the challenges that still remained, I believed in our community's future. The letters had changed everything. Richard Calloway's fraud had upended our lives, but we had survived it, learned from it, and built something better in its wake. That was the real story of Saguaro Heights, not the developer's crime or the HOA's collapse or even the federal trial and conviction. The real story was what came after, when 200 homeowners had to decide what kind of community they wanted to be. We chose to rebuild. We chose transparency over secrecy, democracy over tyranny, cooperation over coercion. Those choices defined us far more than any set of covenants and restrictions ever could. The sun disappeared below the horizon, and someone turned on the patio lights. The pool glowed blue in the darkness. Kids chased each other across the grass. Adults sat in comfortable chairs, talking about ordinary things, neighborhood gossip and work stress and vacation plans, normal life, simple community, the things that should have been easy but had required so much struggle to achieve. I sat down next to Vanessa, taking her hand. She squeezed back, understanding without words. We'd been through something extraordinary, something that had tested our community in ways none of us could have anticipated. The forged signature, the voided plat, the 200 letters that had arrived on that Tuesday afternoon years ago, they had changed everything. But we were still here. Our neighborhood was still here. Transformed, yes. Scarred, certainly. But surviving and even thriving in ways that would have seemed impossible during those dark early months when everything was falling apart. Tom raised his beer. "To Saguaro Heights," he said, "the HOA that died and came back better." We all raised our glasses, laughing at the toast but meaning it too. To Saguaro Heights, to second chances, to communities built on truth instead of fraud, to finding out that even when your entire legal structure is voided by a forged signature, even when 200 homeowners get letters destroying the foundation of everything they thought they knew, even when a federal criminal investigation exposes years of fraud and deception, you can still rebuild. It just takes time, effort, and a willingness to do it right. The neighborhood barbecue continued late into the evening, the kind of event that the old HOA under Patricia would have shut down by 9 p.m. sharp because of noise ordinances. But tonight, nobody complained. The music played, the conversations flowed, and the community that had risen from the ashes of Richard Calloway's fraud celebrated simply being together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There were always issues to resolve, maintenance to handle, budgets to approve. But tonight, we were just neighbors, enjoying a summer evening in Arizona, grateful for what we had built together. The letters had come 3 years ago, and they had changed everything. But they had not destroyed us. They had not broken our community. They had only revealed the truth and given us the chance to build something better. And we had taken that chance. We had done the hard work of creating a real community, one based on actual agreement and mutual respect, rather than forged signatures and fraudulent documents. That was worth celebrating. That was worth protecting. That was worth every minute of the struggle it had taken to get here. As I looked around at my neighbors, at the community we had built, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The journey had been hard, but we had arrived somewhere good, somewhere honest, somewhere real. Saguaro Heights was no longer just a development created by a fraudulent developer. It was our home, shaped by our choices, governed by our consent, maintained by our effort. The forged signature had voided the plat, but it had not voided our community. That we had saved ourselves.